So welcome everybody to this latest video on 162 Maths, and in this video we'll be going over the GCSE Maths Higher paper of November 22, paper 1, which is the non-calculated paper. Now as always, I'll include a question breakdown in the description below so you can see which questions refer to which topic. So let's get started on this November 2022 paper 1, which is a non-calculator on the higher tier. So looking at question 1, it says work out -7 times -7/9. So what you want to do here is you want to convert the whole number so it's written as a fraction. So we write it over 1, and then we just simply multiply the two numerators together. So -7 times -4 is +28, and 1 times 9 is 9. So it's our last option. Moving on to question 2, it says circle the value of √6 to the power of 4. Well, √6 to the power of 4 is √6 times √6 times √6 times √6. These two become √36. These two become √36, which then becomes 6 times 6, which is 36. Moving on to question 3, it says 0.203 equals 1/5 plus x. Well, hopefully you would have spotted that 1 over 5 is 0.2, so I've got 0.203 equals 0.2 plus x. So if I take the 0.2 away, that basically becomes 0, and then it's 3/1000ths, so the correct one is the fourth option. Moving on to question 4, it says circle the correct statement, and the one you want that is correct identity is the first one. Then for question 5, it says divide 62 in the ratio of 3 to 7. So you want to add the number of parts, which become 10 parts, and then do 62 divided by 10, which is 6.2 per part. And then we want to do 3 times 6.2 and 7 times 6.2. Now 6.2 times 3 is going to give me 18.6, and 6.2 multiplied by 7 is going to give me 43.4. Moving on to question 6, it says here is some information about time spent on social media by 40 women and 40 men. Tick one box for the correct statement. So it says 3 women spent more than 11 hours on social media. So looking at more than 11, and then we're looking at the two bottom columns. So 2 plus 1 is 3. So that's definitely true. It then says that the range of men is 15 hours. Well, in terms of the maximum and minimum hours spent, well, the lowest one that's got a frequency is 2, and it's got to be greater than 2. And the next highest frequency is going to be up to 14. So worst in terms of maximum range, it's going to be 14 take away 2, which is 12. So that can't be true, because you know that the range is going to be smaller than 12. It then says that the women have a higher median than the men. Well, let's have a look. So the median position for both these two genders will be 20. So we want to find what group will they be in the 20s. So in terms of the women, the median is going to be in this group here. For the men, it's going to be in this group here. But it all depends on the numbers in those two groups. So it all depends on, like, for example, if the men were all in the higher end of 8 and women were in the lower end of 8, then you might find that the median be switched. So this one might be true. Moving on to question 7, it says the diagram shows vectors A and B. As a column vector, A equals 3, 2. What is B as a column vector? So we want to go from the starting point. So we're going horizontal movement first. So it's 4 to the right, and then 1 down. So that's represented by 4 minus 1. It then says work out 4A. So 4 lots of A, so that's going to be 4 lots of 3, 2. So 4 times 3 is 12, and 4 times 2 is 8. Moving on to 7C, it says A plus C equals 3. Work out the column vector of C. So we've got 3, 2 plus something equals 3, 0. So 3 plus something equals 3, well that's got to be 0, and 2 plus something equals 0, so that must be -2, so it's going to be our last option. Moving on to question 8, it says work out, and we've got this fraction. So what we want to do first is work out the brackets. So it's going to be 7 over 10 minus 4 over 15. So when we're subtracting, we want common denominators. So my common denominator is going to be 30. So I multiply this first fraction by 3. So that's going to be 21 on top. And I multiply the second fraction by 2. So then that becomes 8. So 21 take away 8 gives me 13 over 30. I then want to divide that by 2/3. So I divide that by 2/3, in which the rule of when you're dividing fractions is you flip the second fraction and turn it into a multiply. So 13 times 3 is 39, and 30 times 2 is 60. And then we can simplify that by dividing by 3. So that becomes 13 over 20, and that's there. So any of those two answers will be absolutely fine, because the question doesn't specify for us to simplify the fraction. Moving on to question 9, it says work out the integer values of 12 for x's between 12 and 25, inclusive of 12. Now with these questions, you always want to try and make x by itself in the middle, so we need to divide everything by 4. So if I do that, 12 divided by 4 is 3, 4x divided by 4 is x, and 25 divided by 4 is 6.25. So I want to write down the whole integers between 3 and 6.25, inclusive of 3. So the correct answer is going to be 3, 4, 5, and 6. For question 10, it says, here is some information about 120 people who visit a shop. 3/4 of the people buy neither a coat or a dress. 19 people buy a coat and 14 people buy a dress. And the question is asking me to complete the Venn diagram. So using this first bit of information, we then know that we want to work out 3/4 of 120. So 120 divided by 4 multiplied by 3 equals 90. So there's going to be 90 people outside. Now in terms of this, what we've got in these two, coat or dress, well, that's going to add up to the bit that's left. So it's going to be 120 minus 90 equals 30. Now if I just add up these two amounts, so I've got 19 and I've got 14. So if I add those two numbers up, I get an answer of 33. Now the overlap, if I was to shade in this sea green and I shade in, well actually let me do it in highlights so I'm not cancelling anything out. So if I just shade in C in yellow and I shade in D in pink, then the bit that's shaded in twice is this middle bit. So this middle bit is the overlap. So then if I then do 33, take away 30, that leaves me with 3. And then if I know that this entire circle, let me just get rid of the colouring. So if I then know that all of this green circle needs to add up to 19, then that's going to be 16. And if I know that all of this circle here needs to add up to 14, then that's going to be 11. And as you can see, I've completed my Venn diagram. Moving on to question 11, it says write 3 to the power 6 times 3 to the power 5 to 3 to the power 7 in the form of n to 1, where n is an integer. So first things first, what we want to do is simplify the bracket. So that because we add the powers, so it becomes 3 to the power of 11 to the 3 to the power of 7. Now if I want to make that to where I've got 1 at the bottom, then I need to take the 3 to the power of 7 over to the other side. So then that then becomes, I take away the power, so that becomes 3 to the power of 4 to 1, and 3 to the power of 4 is 81, so it's going to be 81 to 1. Question 12 then says A is 10% more than B, and the question is asking me to circle the correct ratio. So the circle, what we need, the correct ratio is going to be 11 to 10, and the reason for that is because if we have that A is 10% more, so if we have 1A, then 10% more is going to be 1.1B, and then if I have A over B, and that's going to equal 1.1 over 1. And if I multiply both those numbers by 10, I get 11 to 10. And then that converted into a ratio is 11 to 10. Question 13, it says work out 0.47 recurring plus 0.312. Well, 0.47 recurring is going to be this, and 0.312 is going to be that. Now, let me just get rid of that 7 and put the recurring here. And what I'm doing is I'm adding the numbers up. So this is still going to be 7 recurring. 7 plus 2 is 9. 7 plus 1 is 8. And then I've got this. And then looking for that option is going to be my third option. Moving on to question 14, it says that Craig wants to draw a graph from the values of from -3 to 3, where x coordinate and y coordinate is always in a ratio of 2 to 1. Here is his graph, and the question is asking me to make 2 criticisms of Craig's graph. I don't know where I get Jake from, but there you go. So it then says, so anything along the lines of that this graph is y equals 2x, not y equals a half x. And you could also say that it should go through three 1.5. So picking the coordinate that it does go through would have been absolutely fine. So in terms of the mark scheme, it says an explanation that the ratio and the graph do not match, and another statement that says that the domain of the graph is incorrect. So again, something along the lines of the fact that they should have used more values along the x-axis. So moving on to question 15, it says show that, and we've got this algebraic proof question. We're going to show that eventually we end up with an integer. Now if it simplifies to be an integer, basically all the x's, all the x squareds should cancel out. Now for this, you want to make sure that you're expanding the brackets carefully. So if we look at this one here, this is going to be 6x squared minus 15x plus 8x minus 20. So then simplifying that, we get 6x squared minus 7x minus 20. Then with this bracket here, we get minus 11x squared plus 22x. So let me just write that down just there. And then with this, we get plus 5x squared minus 15x minus 5. So then let's have a look at the x squareds. Well, I've got 6x squared minus 11x squared plus 5x squared. So they cancel out. I then have, looking at the x's, I've got minus 7 plus 22 minus 15, so they cancel out. Now when you are cancelling these out, make sure you can still see what you've simplified it to. So I'm just left with minus 25, which is an integer. And there we go. Moving on to question 16, it says the graph has the equation of x squared plus px plus r, where p and r are constants. The graph passes through the point 0, 4, 1, 3 and 8w. Work out the value of w. So for this, what we want to do now, hopefully one thing you may have spotted in the coordinates is that this represents here the y-intercept. Now the y-intercept in the equation is r, so that means that r equals 4. So what I've got so far is y equals x squared plus px plus 4. Now what I then want to do is I then want to work out what x and y are to work out what p is. So for this I'm going to use the two coordinates. So using 0, 4, I get 4 equals 0. Oh, should get nothing there, because it's just going to equal 4, so that's pointless me using that one. So then if I then use this coordinate here, so using 1, 3. Then I get 3 equals 1 squared plus 1p plus 4. Then simplifying all of that, I get that p is going to equal minus 2. So then the equation of the line then becomes y equals x squared minus 2x plus 4. Then I know with this coordinate here, so when x equals 8, y equals w, so I've got w equals 8 squared minus 2 lots of 8 plus 4, so I've got 64 minus 16 plus 4, so that becomes 64 minus 12, and that then becomes 52. So w equals 52. Then moving on to our next question, it says the table shows information about heights of 60 athletes. Complete the cumulative frequency diagram. So here what we'll do is just do a running total. So this next value from 16 is going to be 16 plus 35, and that's going to be 51, and then adding 7 and then adding 2. So using these values, what I then want to do is move on to the next question because I thought we had to draw it then. It then says circle the class interval that contains the lower quartile. Now for this, the lower quartile, if I look at the total number of data, well, the total frequency equals 60. So the lower quartile is going to be 60 divided by 4, which is in the 15th position. So I then need to find out which block contains the number 15. Well, that's going to be in this block here. So it's going to be where h is between 160 and 170, and that is going to be in this option here. Then moving on to question 17c, it says draw the cumulative frequency diagram to represent the data. So all I've done here is plotted the cumulative frequency values over the bounds, and then what you then want to do is join those points up as best you can with a straight with a smooth curve. And if you do struggle with this, then you can use a ruler to help guide us, but try and join them up with a curve rather than straight lines. The next question then says estimate the number of athletes whose height is more than 176. So you want to find 176 along the x-axis. You then want to draw your line going up to the curve. Then as soon as it hits the curve, you then want to go across. So I make mine to be round about 37. So 37 are less than 176. So therefore 60 minus 37, which is 23, are more than 176 centimeters. So in terms of the answers, what you then want to make sure you're doing is whatever number you read off here, you then want to take that away from 60 to get your final answer marks. Moving on to question 18, it says that a road has 3 sections, D, E and F. The lengths of D, E and F are in ratios. What fraction of the length of the road is section D? So what we want to do is we want to combine these ratios together. So we've got D to E, which is in the ratio of 3 to 5, and I've got E to F, which is in the ratio of 7 to 4. Now when you're wanting to combine these ratios, what you want to try and do is get the common part the same. So here we want to make these two numbers the same. Now how do I do that? Well, I try and find the lowest common multiple of 5 and 7, which is 35. So then what do I have to multiply 5 to get 35? Well, it's going to be 7. So if I multiply 3 by 7, I get 21. Then what do I have to multiply 7 to get 35? I need to multiply by 5. So then I need to multiply that 4 by 5, and that becomes 20. Now the question is asking me what fraction of the length of the road is D. Well, looking at all of this, I can see now that I've got a total number of parts of 55, 75, 76 parts. and it's going to be 21 out of 76. And does that simplify? No, it doesn't. So that would be my final fraction. Moving on to question 19.8, it says work out the value of 5 over 4 to the power of minus 2. Well, the minus means we flip the fraction, so that becomes 4 over 5. So that gets rid of the negative, and then we just got to square both numbers. So 4 squared is 16 and 5 squared is 25. Moving on to 19b, we've got 9 100ths to the power of 3 over 2. So remember that the top number is the power, the denominator in the power is the root. So it's going to be a lot easier for me to root both these two numbers because both numbers are squares. So that's going to be 3 over 10. And I've then got that to the power of 3. Well, 3 to the power of 3 is 27. And 10 to the power of 3 is 1000. Moving on to question 20, it says the only solution for x squared plus bx plus c is minus 15. Work out the value of bc. Well, if there's only one solution, then that means that it must be a repeated bracket, and the number inside the bracket must be the opposite of the answer, so it's going to be plus 15. So this then becomes x plus 15, x plus 15. Then expanding the brackets, you should end up with x squared plus 30x plus 225. So b is going to equal 30 and c is going to equal 225. Question 21 says convert 0.61 as a fraction. So the first thing you want to do is make it equal to x. We then multiply it by 10, so we get 6.1 recurring. And then I multiply it by another 10, so I get 100x equals 61.1 recurring. Then taking these two equations, we get 100x and 10x, and that's 61.1 and 6.1 recurring. We take the two things away, so end up with 90x equals 61 take away 6, which is 55. So x equals 55 divided by 90, and I can divide both numbers by 5, in which I get an answer of 11 over 18. So any of those two fractions would be fine because, again, the question doesn't ask us to simplify the fraction. Moving on to question 28, it says 4, 8 is a point on the circle centre O. A tangent at 4, 8 intersects at the x-axis at P. Work out the x-ordinate of P. So the first thing we need to do with regards to this is we need to work out the gradient. So first thing, ultimately what we need is to work out the equation of this line. So we'll just call that line L, and we'll call this circle C. So we want to work out, well, we know that a tangent meets the radius at 90 degrees. So that line O, and if I just call this point X, actually let's not call it X, that's going to be too confusing. Let's call it N. And so ON is going to be perpendicular to the line P. So working out the gradient of ON, well, if I turn that into a triangle using the coordinates, and it's got a height of 8 and a base of 4. So the gradient of ON is going to be 8 over 4, which is 2. Now that means then that the gradient of L is going to be the negative reciprocal. So it's going to be minus 1 over 2. Then I can then work out the equation of a line. So number 3 is the equation of L is going to be using m equals minus a half and the coordinates of 4, 8, because that's the point that lies on the line. So I've got y minus 8 equals minus a half x minus 4. And again, you could use y equals mx plus c, exactly the same, but I prefer using this one, especially when you know the gradient and the point of the line. So simplifying this, we get y minus 8 equals minus a half x plus 2. So I get y equals minus a half x, take the 8 over, and I get y equals a half x plus 10. So that's the equation of this line. So then to find p, so at p, y equals 0. So what I end up with is 0 equals minus a half x plus 10. So that means that minus 10 equals minus a half x. So then positive 20 equals x. So x equals 20. So then moving on to question 23, it says 4 times sine 30 times tan 30 times cos 30 equals sine y. Work out one possible value of y. So first things first, let's actually just recall these exact values of trig. So sine 30 is equal to a half. Tan 30 is equal to 1 over root 3. And cos 30 is root 3 over 2. So then substituting those numbers in, we get 4 times 1 over 2 times 1 over root 3 times root 3 over 2. And if I turn that 4 into a fraction and then multiply all the numerators together, so I get 4 root 3, I then get 4 root 3, which equals 1. So sine y equals 1. Then if I look at the sine graph, which is another topic, and we know that sine starts at 0. And so where it hits 1 is at these values here. So it's either going to be 90 and the next one is where we're adding on 360. So 90 plus 360 gives me an answer of 450. So I would say the most common answer is going to be that sine y, also say y equals 90, 450. Let me just write that a little bit properly. So remember, you only need to give one answer because it says one possible value. So you could give 90 or 450, or basically anything along the lines of, I don't know why I've just done that, or you could have any answer of 90 plus 360n. So any of those would give you an answer that would get you full marks for y. Moving on to question 24, it says triangle ABC is drawn on the grid, and it says ABC is transformed. So we've got a few transformations that we need to do, so let's just try and put that all on the grid. So the first one we need to do is reflect it on the line x equals 1. Well, x equals 1 is this line here. So let me just label that as x equals 1. It's really important again that you label these and draw the lines. So if we reflect, that's going to be 2 away. So that's going to be here, and it's 3. Again, hopefully yours would be a lot neater. So that's A dash, B dash, and C dash. So that's that one done. We then want to rotate it upon the point of 1 minus 4. Well, 1 minus 4 is here. So then reflecting that shape 90 degrees anti-clockwise. Well, again, using tracing paper, it's going to be extremely difficult on using the computer. So if I reflect that, that's going to be 2, and then what was that, 5? So 2, 3. So that's going to be there, and we're reflecting it. So then that's going to look something like this, I would say. And then says which point A is invariant to the combined transformation. So you can see that B is going to be the same. So therefore, if I just label this as A double dash, and that's going to be C double dash, and so the point that's invariant is going to be B, which doesn't move. So then moving on to question 25, it says solve x squared minus 5x minus 6 is less than 0. So I want this, we'll probably assume we're doing it by factorising because there's no indication of rounding, so we don't need to use the quadratic formula. So hopefully you would have spotted that the two values inside the brackets are going to be using 6 and 1, or we've got minus 6 and positive 1. Then the solutions are going to be minus 1 or 6. So then if I just draw my parabola, this is minus 1, this is 6. I'm looking for the region where it's below the x-axis, so it's this region here. So the final answer will look something like this. And then for b, we just need to represent that on the number line. So I've got a circle at minus 1, a circle at 6. I join them up and I don't need to shade in any of those circles. Then moving on to question 26, it says P, Q and R are points on a circle. SP is a tangent to the circle and RQ equals PQ. Prove that Y equals 90 minus X. Well, for starters, that if we've got a tangent, we know that we've got the alternate segment theorem means that RQP is going to be 2x. Now, if this triangle RQP is going to be isosceles, because we know that RQ is equal to PQ, then this angle here must equal Y as well. So then if I take that triangle, I know that all angles inside a triangle add up to 180. So I've got 180 equals 2x plus 2y. And then simplifying that, I get 90 equals x plus y. So then taking the x over, I get 90 minus x equals y, which is what they wanted me to show. Moving on to question 27, it says work out the root of 2 and 13 over 16 minus 2 over root 5. I'm going to give our answer in terms of third form. So first things first, let's write this as an improper fraction. So we've got root of 2 times 16, which is 32. So we've got 32 plus 13 over 16. Now 32 plus 13 is 45. So we've got 45 over root 16. Now I can write that as root 45 over root 16, which is root 9 times root 5 over 4. So that becomes 3 root 5 over 4. So I can replace this with that. So then what I've then got is 3 root 5 over 4 minus 2 over root 5. Then if what I want to try and do here is maybe rationalize this denominator here. So I multiply that by root 5 over root 5. So that then becomes 2 root 5 over 5, leaving me with 3 root 5 over 4 minus 2 root 5 over 5. Now, when I'm subtracting, I want to try and get a common denominator. So my common denominator here is going to be 20. So I multiply this first fraction by 5. So that becomes 15 root 5. And the second one by 4, which then becomes 8 root 5. And then from this we get 15 minus 8 root 5 is 7 root 5 over 20. And there is my final answer.